Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of the Manly Catholic, and back again. Welcome back, Ryan Young. How you doing?
I'm doing great, James. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, for those of you who don't remember, I mean, it was 2 weeks ago. I hope you guys have a somewhat of a memory of that. But we had to cut the interview off early with Ryan. We just finished up talking about marriage and the dangers of being a yes, dear man. And then he had a little bit of a family emergency. So, Ryan, can you please fill our listeners in about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what happens in the world of like recording stuff, you really have no control over your surrounding environment, especially when you have 8 kids, seven of which are in the house at any given time, particularly with like a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, who are all little hyperactive guys. So, of course, I'm in this middle of this podcast. The whole house knows this is the time to go watch a movie. And like my wife has been depriving them of electronics for, the day. So they would be, more addicted at this hour, right? And it's pretty bad when my middle teenager kid comes running in here with like wide eyes saying, "Dad, we need you now," right? And so I got to run out of the room. I get to the kitchen. My 2-year-old, her whole face and head is covered in blood. And my wife is sitting there over the sink just trying to figure out where the bleeding's coming from. And so, I'm in medicine. And so we were, I had to go find a good gash on her forehead. And we spent the rest of the night in urgent care,
Hmm.
where, frankly, I should have done the suturing, but you really can't pin your 2-year-old down as a dad and put her back together again. I don't think she'll remember that fondly for the rest of our lives. So, you know, needless to say,
That's
here we are, round two.
I think that's what they call prudence, Ryan,
Yes.
is choosing to let somebody else pin your 2-year-old daughter down and suture
Well,
her up. So
normally, you'd be amazed what I would do in the kitchen in my house. Okay,
yeah, that's
but
true.
what's funny is when you have all these kids, they all start losing teeth at the same time. So every
Oh
once in
yeah.
a while, they'll just make a line, and I'm just pulling tooth after tooth and just laying them on the table in a line. We've done wacky stuff. I'm telling you.
Oh
Even
man,
my
that'd
older
be
kids have been sutured by me in the kitchen. Like,
oh, of course. Well,
yeah,
you're
take
PA.
some lidocaine. It's
Yeah,
like a
there you
movie
go.
here.
Well, so to I guess we'll start back how we ended. So because you're making a really good point. We are talking about the marriage and the four main obstacles that men face in relation to into growing. But then you talked about in relation to marriage and the dangers of being a yes, dear man. So maybe recap that, and then we can
Sure.
kind of go steer the conversation from there, if you don't mind.
Sure. So again, I'm not going to go all the way through it, but again, the
Sure, of
four
course.
main points of like why men are suffering is that lack of belief in God. Again, if there's no God, then there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no objective. Just do what you want, do how you feel, and go from there, right? And then we went into there's a lack of fatherhood or masculine examples in our society with which to emulate. And then we went into that women are far more promiscuous, that men don't have to earn physicality with them anymore. And with that, we're not being called to be generally better than our base self by women, right? And then fourthly, the women have this kind of strange sense of feminism, of a strong woman. And that was kind of driven by kind of the feminist movement in 1968, the Hillary Clinton type generation, where you have to be the most alpha woman out there to be a real woman. Power has to be your god, right? And by the way, it's not enough just to be a woman. You want to be like a man in that kind of mindset. And by the way, men aren't necessary, so we don't need a mindset, right? And we don't need them to help raise kids in that mindset, right, of that feminist 68 movement. And therefore, if we're going to have men in our lives, they just need to kind of be a whipping boy, right? And kind of do what we want them to do when we want them to do it. And otherwise, and we're going to proclaim that that's real manhood. I was reading a blog about they have the abortion discussion obviously on the front page of the news now, and you have some men standing up and starting to speak, and the women are like, real men would understand that this is a woman's decision and all this. And they're classifying, quote, real men to be docile, to be quiet, to not lead. To, God forbid, there's a discussion that has anything to do with women or about women. Men have absolutely no say. I mean, imagine if that was flipped around. We'd say, oh, you're just a woman. You can't speak. Sorry. You know, they'd be all over us for that too. Right. So bottom line is, you know, and men are buying that lie. And then when that goes into marriage, we get this, happy wife, happy life. Well, there's some truth there, right? In marriage, a strong man isn't one who's a tyrant. He's not one who doesn't communicate with his wife. He's not one who just makes unilateral decisions all day. He's a man that absolutely cares and loves his spouse, right? And that loving of his spouse cares what she thinks about most everything, but is the man of the house. There is a responsibility that lays on the man of the house to make large family decisions, right? When it really matters, and to take all the input like any good leader would, but ultimately a decision has to be made. And again, a lot of that has to do with, how does the house function, particularly financially in other ways, right? It's one of these things where, do we need to move? Are we taking this next job? Is that promotion really worth it? Where do we look financially in the future? Looking at the way the house is run, is discipline wise, are you giving all the discipline to the wife to deal with? Or are you actually taking things in hand? Or does the buck stop at you? I mean, I have kind of two ways to get the capital punishment without trial, earlier things in my house. Okay, there's just two. One is lying, right? Because you got to kill it early. Because if you don't, there's so many other things that depend on lying, which is character, integrity, all these other things. If you're a liar, right, trust, all these other virtues are falling apart as you grow. So lying gets pretty stiff in my house real early, right? The second major thing is disrespect to mama, right? Because she has to be my voice when I'm not here. And they have to listen to her as they're listening to me, and particularly in the world of respect. And so those are two ways those are things that are just not acceptable in my house. The kids know it from the age of 2, right? But what happens in these kind of alpha women, houses, is that you ultimately they end up oftentimes marrying beta guys, right? Or alpha guys that are still kind of whipped around her. And what do I mean by that? It's the yes dear guy, right? Everything she wants and whatever, she's leading the ship there. Yes dear, yes dear, yes dear, yes dear. And I've seen one of two results. One is either the woman just leads their whole life and she's, quote, the strong matriarch, right? Or two, the guy leaves her after 20 years of marriage, right? Because the first waitress who gives him any attention or respect as a man, he finally is like, I'm alive, I'm awake, I'm being called to be who I am built to be. And all of a sudden, I need to get out of this marriage where I feel like I'm basically a whipping boy through this whole thing. And you see these men leaving right around the age of 40 to 47, usually at about the 15 to 20 year mark into a marriage, and this is, I'd say, kind of what you'd see 10 years ago. Because again, I work in facial plastics. I'm dealing with all the women who just got single from a divorce, right? And they're all coming in to basically gussy up for the next round of life, right? And when you hear their stories, there's some consistencies that keep coming up, and that's one of them, right? Now, ironically, in second marriages, and this happens for both men and women, they tend to actually do what the first spouse had problems with, right? And they end up having a more successful second marriage in many ways because they were too stubborn to ever change in the first marriage that they had. And all of a sudden, they took that information and then used it on the next guy and lived happily ever after. Now, my question's always been, why couldn't we do that the first time, right?
Right.
And so, there's some pride there, and one gamesmanship, and you can never be wrong and all that. And that's how marriages fall apart. That's not strong women, right? And again, it's not strong men to just be a doormat either. All right. So, and again, at the end of the day, I've just never seen women attracted to weak men, right? I'm surrounded by women and they laugh. I'm like, because when I bring this up, none of them would argue with any of the points I just said.
Mhm.
And they are actually looking for strong men, and it's super hard to find. And strong, again, just being strong self-awareness, strong meaning of life, a strong faith is very attractive to women, right? A sense of purity is actually very attractive to women. They don't want to be the 1,002nd,
Right.
and so, some sense of purity, of righteousness, character, integrity, you become a very top shelf guy, right? And very attractive, even if you're not physically attractive. They're attracted to that kind of leader. And at the end of the day, again, that will bring you top shelf women if you're listening to this and you're single, which is, if you want to have upright women, be upright, be a leader, don't be afraid to speak and be respectful at the same time. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, Ryan, for those men out there who might be listening and maybe they see themselves as that beta, or maybe they're in that relationship that you described,
right.
that like, oh, I am kind of being whipped on or walked all over, whatever description
Totally
you want to use.
submissive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. So what would your advice be then? So like, okay, I recognize this is what's happening. So how do I go about then changing it to be more order to what obviously God intended, where it's the man leads the household? But in a lot of marriages nowadays, like you said, the yes dear marriages, where it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, and I'd say most, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what I would suggest is actually a sit down, alcohol filled conversation. Okay. Which is
always.
It does actually relax her to be able to handle some of this. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bottom line is you can kind of recognize, and it's going to take some humility, and a lot of these conversations can actually happen verbally. Okay. So you could try, but again, when you're dealing, particularly if there's an alpha woman involved, she can't handle that verbal stuff. It's actually far more effective to put it in writing, in a letter. Okay. And the reason for that is because they're going to have their volcano explosion first. They're probably going to come back and say some horrible things, or not. You'd be surprised if it's done in some love and they know you love them. It's kind of one of those things. And then then you go through, and in the letter you explain, right? Because the point of a letter is they can have time to absorb it. They can have time to reread it. They can have time to think and pray about it, right? Before they speak. Or they may write back. And sometimes that's way more effective in the world of really getting it to stick in there. Okay. My wife and I, have been in the habit, of nipping a lot of stuff in the bud that are bigger. I simply once a month asking each other randomly, is there anything I could do better for you in our relationship? Right? When you ask that question, by definition, you're opening a door to some critique, which makes it like I don't have to make a critique at the moment every time there's a problem, because there's generally a door open later for me to kind of say, yeah, it would be great if X or great if Y, right? In the world of making decisions and other stuff, you can have a wife saying, well, I'm just as capable of making a decision as you are. Yes, you are. But I don't always agree with your decision, right? And you say, I feel like part of my, and you tell them, part of my masculinity is leadership. Part of my masculinity, the way I'm naturally built, is to defend and protect this family in all ways, whether it's how much social media the kids are getting on TV, whether it's how, is the family going to be able to eat tomorrow? That weighs on me in a way that, I have to fulfill those things, or I don't feel like I'm living up to my call as a man, right? Every woman, if you say, I want to be a better man for you in this family, is going to say, great. And believe it or not, even the most alpha women out there are actually going to respect that and attempt to do it if you're taking the lead. And again, that's not I'm better than you. It's just I'm built different. I'm built to do this. And I also got to tell you, alpha women don't want to lead at home. Okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, they really only married you. If you're a beta dude, is because they can't find someone more alpha than them. Okay. I mean, it's not complicated.
That's true.
So, they basically are saying, well, I don't want to be single. So I'm going to marry this guy who's not as strong. And I guess I'll have to wear the pants at home too. They don't want to wear the pants at home. So the point is if you're giving them an out on that and they respect you, then and they know you love them, and you also, in that conversation or whenever you're writing, say, there's no decision I'm going to be making unilaterally, but I want to make it with you, and I want to be able to take the lead on it, right? And if I'm sucking at it, let me know, right? But that is, it's part of just kind of recapturing that is what I would do.
Yeah. No, that's awesome advice. And I love that too, Ryan. It's never making a decision unilaterally. And I think that is kind of the perception that was like, if you have a patriarchy, it's always, well, I'm going to just do what I want and whatever I say goes. It's like, that's not how it ever really was. And it's not like I'm going to do, I mean, obviously there's been manipulation and abuse of it, of course, and that's tyranny, as you mentioned earlier, but I'm going to take the input of everyone involved, but then it's the buck stops with me. And I think going back to what we talked about last episode too, is the importance of is having that relationship with God, is understanding that you are the spiritual leader of the house too. And then if you are failing in that regard, then you can't have prudence and wisdom to make the right decisions for your family. So I think that's a huge misconception, that having a patriarchy in the family is the same as having a tyranny, which is not how it's designed. And I think that's all people think about, is the extreme example where it's, well, I don't care about my wife and kids. Everything that I do is, it's the selfish man who's making all these decisions.
It becomes a Machado kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's not effective, right? So it's one of those things where, again, if they know you love them. Now, another thing is by the way, say it. I mean, say it. Right? When's the last time you wrote a really nice note to your wife? Right? Like a really just, I'm just so happy I'm married to you kind of note, right? When's the last time? It's like they need to hear it. And when's the last time you told her she's beautiful? And she may not be, but one part of her might be. Just be like, I get lost in your eyes, or gosh, there's nothing more fun than holding your hand. I mean, whatever the hell it's going to be. Okay. Right. But pick a part or pick a outfit or whatever. When's the last time you complimented her and really, and that, there's, that's also just, that helps kind of the harder leadership role of when a decision has to be made. In other words, she knows you love her, right? There's no doubt there. And she knows you're trying to make the best decisions for the family, whether it's the kids and other stuff. Then it's like, I respect him enough that, I'm going to tell him what I think, and he's not always going to take it. And that's okay. So, yeah.
No, and this is actually a perfect transition to our next topic. So how I first heard about you, Ryan, I don't know if I mentioned this in the first episode, it was actually through Knights of Columbus. And they put on a video series on Bishop Olmsted's apostolic exhortation into the breach. And those videos were phenomenal. And because you talked about leadership, and they have a whole video on leadership in this video series. And I'll leave a link in the show notes. I know Father Dominic and me have mentioned this several times in the past. I've watched it probably 4 or 5 times because it's just so powerful, and it breaks down, there's like spiritual warfare and leadership and fatherhood and things like that. So Ryan, I guess, talk to me about how you got involved in that project, and I guess we can kind of steer the conversation from there.
All right. So, it's my life is weird. All right. So I just finished a book where the author says, for those who don't believe in God, they become very bored with our life. Okay. And, I had to think about it. Gosh, there's a lot of truth there, right? Why is that? Well, because without God, you're so much in control. I mean, all you're trying to do is generally satisfy pleasure, right? And so you either want to get more comfortable, make more money, go on your next trip, have more sex, whatever it's going to be, right? But there's such a shallowness to it. And what's funny is even the richest people in the world, right, getting anything they want anytime are bored. They get bored of it. And then what do? Well, you make a game with your billions of dollars and try to beat the next billionaire. I mean, they have nothing to do. They're bored, right? When you're working for God and your life is His, well, you get on this adventure you can't even imagine. I mean, you make your 5-year plan and God laughs, right? And so it's like, you have an idea. It doesn't mean you're wandering the earth with no clue, right. But it is definitely a grand adventure. And the Knights kind of business is one of those, right? So, we get this random call from my parish. It says, Ryan, I want to let you know, you guys won the Family of the Year for St. Martin de Porres and Poughkeepsie. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Me and that big pool of 5 families or whatever, I feel great. Like, this is terrific. Like, all right. So then I get called. Well, we submitted all of those families into this bucket for New York State. Mm-hmm. And you are the no, it's actually the territory. So the first bucket was the whole territory of the archdiocese, perhaps, right? Mm-hmm. And then, they said, you won that. I'm like, okay, all right. I don't even remember. It's not like we applied, right? Yeah. So then I get a call a month later. You won. You are the state winners of the Knights of Columbus Family of the Year. And I'm looking at my wife like, no, they clearly don't know us, right? And I'm like, how the heck did that happen? We're like, all right, let's go. And then we go to this little dinner and I give a little speech, And then a month later, we're going to Sam's Club. Now, if you ever have a big family, everyone at Sam's knows us by name, okay? And we walk in there and they give us an employee because of the amount of food we're buying, okay? To walk around with us and push the extra cart. And we know the place by heart. So we're done with Sam's Club and the reasonable amount was like $1,000 worth of groceries within an hour, okay?
Yep.
So, this is like the witching hour at my house, which is right before dinner. We get home, we're stressed out. It's like raining out. The kids are emptying the car. My wife's trying to get dinner on. Everyone's grumpy. Everyone's screaming at each other. It is absolute mayhem and chaos. Okay. And the phone rings right then. And I'm screaming at 5 kids to stop hitting each other and biting each other. They're spilling stuff all over the place. I mean, there's poopy diapers because we just got back in the house. It is chaos. Okay. And the phone rings, and it's the national director of whatever of the Knights of Columbus, and he goes, hi, congratulations. We put your name in from the state of New York with all of the other state winners of the United States and all of the territories of the planet Earth. And he goes, and you guys are the International Family of the Year for the Knights of Columbus. And my literal statement to him was, have you lost your mind? I mean, behind me was like Armageddon, okay? I couldn't even talk to the guy on the phone. I was literally being chased around. I had a porch around my house at the time. I'm being chased by 2 children trying to settle a fight while I'm on the phone with this guy. It was God's irony, okay? It was very funny. And so while doing that, I went to the convention, right? And then I gave a speech. And the speech had to do with, to some extent, if you're handing out coats and everything as the Knights of Columbus, but you're not bringing in Jesus Christ by name, and this has to do with Catholic schools, and this has to do with organizations, anyone can run good things. But the question is, what stands apart from the Knights of Columbus and, the Peace Corps, right? Mm-hmm. Or the Knights of Columbus and your local, soup kitchen run by the county, right? And what's the difference between Catholic school and public school? Well, it should end up with an introduction to Jesus Christ by name, not by some esoteric, philosophical, wimpy idea. He's the truth. And the day we lose that, we lose the organization, okay? There's no point. You're wasting a lot of time. Heaven is the objective, right? And so I had a speech to thousands of people at this Knights convention. They weren't used to that. Usually it's a thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I got up there and I was like, I called these guys out, right? The whole organization, I said, we got to go and we got to get back to Jesus Christ and think about if your project, your time, your talents, your energy, is it worth, are you getting people to heaven or not through it, right? That's the first question. Then giving a coat makes sense, but you're missing the true gift that we have, which is truth. And now that was tied to Camp Veritas, right? And so I got introduced to Spirit Juice, who then got us introduced into the video. Now, Spirit Juice is a major Catholic production company that was running the convention. They were running interviews, and then they saw how that worked, and then invited me on into the breach. So then we had Spirit Juice chase me around my house for a week, which I told them right there, you're not going to catch me. You're not going to get us acting for you. I don't have the time for that. So I was like, you're not going to get the really cheesy shots in the backyard of having a catch with your son, and the kid can't throw it back because you've never had a catch in your life with him, right? Like that's not my life. But I'm just saying, we're not going to pose, okay? Right. You're going to see me cutting the lawn, and you're going to see like survival, which is what we're in right now, right? And it might be more entertaining than like the lion on the hunt in the Serengeti or something, because like my house is, in the world of humanity is survival. So it was one of these like, all right, and they came, they loved it. I mean, they were a really good team. I can't more highly promote them. So anyway, so that's how Into the Breach happened.
Oh my gosh. The International Family of the Year. Are you out of your mind?
Are you guys out of your minds? I have no idea. Like it was wild. It was insane. I got to tell you.
I'm crying over here. That's
one of those God moments,
amazing. God, God does have a sense of humor, doesn't he?
He does.
It's just that 5-year plan that you talked about. And of course, it's always good to have a plan, but God's just up there. He's like, yeah, it's not going to happen. None of those things you wrote down are going to happen in your life. So I just want to put that out there. But
and the fun part of it is, you look back in retrospect, and sometimes it's things you want to plan for because you can't. But the reality is you're going to hit some suffering patches in those 5 years that didn't work out, right? And sometimes you're going to hit victories, and sometimes all hell breaks loose. But you know what you get out of all that? Like a genuine human experience. What is the contrast of boredom in atheism or wealth or whatever? The contrast is when you're giving your life to God, okay, and every minute is his, and your money is his, and your time is his, and all that. And again, that doesn't mean you're not going to suffer. As a matter of fact, you'll likely suffer a bit more, but you're never bored. I can't imagine someone saying they're bored in that, right? And I also can't imagine them looking back and saying, through all those trials, am I a better human? Have I really experienced the human experience, to the not to this base self, but to the height of our humanity as we're drawing closer to the human nature of Christ? You're really diving into this like depth of the life we have. And that is just rich, right? In grace and in love and in virtue. And again, it may not be pretty, but there's a deep sense of peace and joy when you can know that in his hands, right? And so that's the trade-off.
Yeah, never underestimate what God can do for you and your family. I think I learned that at least 3 times a day.
Right. Well, and the other thing is that the victory isn't always in winning some award, and it's always getting this promotion at work. The victory is in the simple and the quiet just as often, okay? Which is, if you could just make your own kingdom. I don't care if you're working as a garbage man with other garbage men. You're making your own kingdom joyful and peaceful and wise, and you bring them up and you encourage them. And you're, like, it's important as men that you support men because they just don't have it, right?
Absolutely.
Which is, so whatever, and there's no accidents. So whoever you're encountering all day long is your very test, so you can get to heaven, right? Are you passing the test? Are you living to that fullest human experience by collecting garbage with your buddies?
Right. Right.
And so there's a, that doesn't mean you can't have a sense of humor, but it means that they know, and it doesn't have to be like, hi, do you know Jesus? They know that when you're talking about the weekend, don't exclude that you want to go to mass that weekend.
Right.
Right. It's one of these things like, yeah, I'm heading to mass and then and then and I'm going to pray a rosary with my family or whatever. What's that? You're fishing. So as you're fishing and you're evangelizing, you're basically throwing out these kind of things that you're doing, which are natural if you're a practicing Catholic in this world. And then you're taking those opportunities, not only explain it, but sometimes inviting them if it's time. And it's for you to read. There's some tact, got to let you know.
Yeah. And Ryan, after our last interview, I was talking to my wife about, I love that you always say that there are no accidents in this life. And I was telling her how easy that is to forget, that everything we do, everything we're a part of, every encounter we have every single day is all a part of God's plan. And we only think of the good things, and we give thanks to God and the negative things that we encounter, the suffering that we encounter, we often forget that is a chance for us to grow in virtue in our learning experience. And that's when we grow the most too. And
you
so
must
when
have read my book.
I haven't read it.
Chapter on suffering, and that's exactly the point.
Yeah. See, and I haven't read it, but I'm gonna have to get it. So,
well,
but
now I'm validated. All right,
yeah,
you just validated it.
There you go.
Awesome.
So now this is all on the internet. I haven't read the book, and I just validated your book for you, Ryan. So you're welcome.
Yeah, seriously, you could have written the thing. But that's the whole point, which is you never grow in virtue. And this is the point of that chapter. Virtue can't happen unless suffering's involved.
Yeah.
You never grow in patience and fortitude and charity and love, any of that stuff, when you're sitting on a couch in pleasure watching baseball, or like, unless your team's losing. But but like, but generally, it's going to happen through suffering, right?
Right.
There is an argument. God's not adverse to it, right? His only begotten Son suffered on a cross for our sins, right? So the second, and he didn't do it. He didn't say, I'm doing this so you never have to suffer. He said, pick up your cross, right? And the second business there is that if you think about how are you going to become a saint, it is through not the easy people in your life. It's the hard people in your life. And that's going to be a sibling, a parent, a child, usually the closest people to you. Because when they're that close, you love them the most. When they say things, they hurt the most. When they do things, it hurts the most. You care the most because you love them. If you didn't love them, it wouldn't hurt. It doesn't matter if some guy on TV shoots someone. It really does matter if your own sibling does,
Right.
Like, so it's like, it's a, so yeah, I mean, it is a life of richness when you are with God and your life is his. He's going to give you an adventure that is, the best. It's going to give you the best life you can have. So before paradise, by the way. And the suffering is just the first half of the story.
Yeah.
That's the cross. You can get so wrapped up in the joy of suffering, which isn't really joyful. I mean, suffering does suck.
It sucks.
There is an acceptance level, though. I mean, I work in medicine. You can see the difference is to have fearlessness, right? So I work in medicine. Just take COVID. Take COVID as the example, okay? People who have given their life to God and truly have done that and are kind of looking forward to see him at some point, and you're kind of in overtime of your life, right? Because you're only here because he wants you to be here. You're enjoying the life you're living, yet rich life. But we all know, for those who know our Lord, this is just a shadow of the paradise ahead. Don't screw it up, right? But man, if we're going to go down, it's not the end of the world, right? So, COVID hits and everybody is running and hiding under rocks all over the place, right? And they just don't understand why these crazy Christians are like, it happens, Yeah. I mean, by the way, you're going to go through this whole societal walk. And the walk is going to be first denial and fear, right? And eventually, this sucker ain't ever going anywhere, even with vaccines, right? Even with the mask, even if we eradicate it from the United States. In a week, when we let people in, it's coming back, right? So what's the long-term plan? So the Christians kind of figured that out. Now, it doesn't mean to be irresponsible or stupid, but on the other hand, there was a peacefulness that the secular world could not understand.
Right.
How we didn't have more fear, right? And it's a perspective issue about death. And again, imagine living a life that is God's and living a death that is God's. And when you do that, you're invincible, man. I mean, what do you have to worry about?
Yeah. What do you have to fear?
What do you have to fear? You're on God's time. It's overtime.
Right.
Well, okay. Oh, I'm going to die from COVID. I get to go to the beach earlier. Great. Like, what's the problem? So yeah.
Oh man, that's great. Okay, so coming full circle, because I'm excited for this part. So I want to ask you about the patron saint. If you could be the patron saint of anything and why? And I know you have a good story with this, so I'm excited to hear it. So if you could be the patron saint of anything, Ryan, what would it be and why?
All right. So, there is, I'm definitely not certain patron saints. Okay. Now there's like, I run Camp Veritas and Fearless Ministries. Right? So Camp Veritas is like a week-long sleepaway experience for a Catholic, anybody, but it's a Catholic camp for middle and high schoolers. They just play and pray all day. I think we talked about that on the first episode. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is there's the patron saint of like righteousness, of wisdom, of purity, and all that. That ain't me. I'm the patron saint of stubbornness. Okay. And when I say stubbornness, it's because if you're going to do a charism of God's work, you're going to hit every roadblock in the world, right? I have one singular objective while I draw breath, and I think it's the only reason I have a pretty good eternal and insurance policy for now, right? Which is, I only have one job, which is to bring souls to the boss, right? And I do that by bringing them to camp or anything I can, and I drop them at the foot of the Eucharist. And I let him do his thing, right? And that for me is when I'm standing in judgment, and he's going to say, Ryan, what'd you do for me? I'm going to say, I brought him to you. And if you couldn't get him, then who the heck am I, right?
Yeah, I gave him to you, and my hands are tied.
Look, after that, I mean, dude, you're God, I'm not, did I get in?
That's awesome. Oh, I love that. I brought them to you, and then if they're lost, then that's your fault.
Yeah, well, if they're lost, look. So, but the patron saint of stubbornness. Now, the thing about it is, what is Satan's only objective? Now, think about it. He has one objective. There's only one game in the war of souls. His only objective is to make sure my objective doesn't happen, right? Because if my objective is bringing these eternal souls to Jesus Christ, his only objective is to make sure that doesn't happen. And he throws every possible thing at one trying to do this. And it's very discouraging if you allow it to be, right? You really have to continually refocus on what is my mission. I can worry about other people's choices. I can be really angry and get really into the mud with everyone trying to stop this from happening, from all the stupidest reasons you can imagine. Okay. And I would say my most frustrating thing is dealing with people who are in the bureaucratic church to a great extent, who cannot let go of the present system for a little change, or there's lots of envy, there's lots of tearing people down, there's lots of I'm offended kind of stuff when anyone wants to do anything, right? And there's a lot of falsity. And if you've ever tried to work with the church and many things, you're going to face all of that. And I'm saying it's not the whole church. That's ridiculous. I found the greatest saints in the church, right? But the church is not always there to blow wind. You would think, I'm bringing kids to the foot of the cross and the Eucharist. How hard could it be to get support of people in the church? You'd be amazed, okay?
Very true.
And so, and they're the obstacle. I spend more time dealing with them than I do the Muslims trying to stop us, or, even the atheists for that matter, to some extent. And so, I'm just not going to take your no for an answer, right? I'm going to keep going until God tells me to stop. Now, there's only two ways that's going to happen. A bishop himself says, don't do it, and I want it by his mouth and in writing, okay? Not by a minion. I want him to speak it so God can hear it, okay? Because we're dealing with an overnight event, and the bishops don't like that. necessarily at this point. And it's not the bishops don't like it. The lawyers don't like that. So
Of
just
course.
be very honest with your listeners. They're shying away from these overnight events, right? But how do you have a pilgrimage, a life-changing step out of your life and look back at it experience? How do you have that if you're not going to leave your house?
Yeah.
Or if you're going to go to a 6-hour quote retreat on a weekend, which isn't a retreat.
Right.
And bottom line is we've had 44 camps that are week long with over 10,000 youth. We've never had a single problem. Either the system of checks and training works or it doesn't, right? And we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. But I work in medicine. It's like if you have a patient who needs cardiothoracic surgery or they're going to die, right? There's lots of risks involved. They might even die on the table. You might even get sued. You still do your history. You still go in there and do the best you can. And you might get sued, but that's the only way you're going to save that person's life.
Right.
And I'm looking at the church right now as a very ill patient. That who's the solution? Jesus Christ. How do you do it? You get them in front of him as much as possible. How do you do that? What works? What's better than time with him? Did we talk about the new evangelization with Pope John Paul II in the first round?
Yep. We did.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, that would be that kind of thought, which is go out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing it, again, bishops are very supportive of camp. They all come. Okay. Mm-hmm. We're supported by entire seminaries. We're supported by 40 diocesan priests every summer over 5 camps. We're supported by a dozen religious groups, right? But there's always those administrators and attorneys in between just trying to, get there and just, so as I said, stubbornness, because I'm going to keep going. I don't take no for an answer. I'm going to go over you, under you, around you. Now, what's other really kind of funny, one other indicator of maybe God's done with the project is you just run out of money.
See, I thought you were going to say, or you die. And then,
well,
okay,
no,
then
because
over.
other people are going to pick it up, right? So,
That's true.
It's one of these things where it's like, am I tone deaf to God because this person in the church is trying to kill it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe God, I would think this person's talking to God pretty closely, right?
Yeah, right.
You're thinking to yourself, should I stop because this person's telling me to stop? There's 1,000 reasons to stop.
Yeah.
And then you look around and you say, well, but what am I doing? I'm doing the only thing that matters, right? And again, there is a force out there to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So you're in a constant and now I do that with some spiritual direction as well. But those are the two main indicators right now. Mm-hmm. Unless God talks to me, it's going to be a bishop or it's going to be I run out of money. I mean, God knows that's my standard.
There you go.
So I'm excited. It's one of these things where I'm excited to see where this journey takes us. I'm able to sit at front court, courtside seats to watch saints being made left and right. I've also found that this mountain that we're climbing to get to the top, God does not draw in straight lines. There's 50 ways in a human mind that we can get to the top real quick and easy, right? It's never been the case with Camp Veritas. We start walking up and then we walk down. Then we take a left, then we go up, then we go back down. I mean, it's all over the place. He scribbles like a 2-year-old, okay? He sees the big picture. Yeah. And I'm starting to realize a couple of things. One, I may never be alive to see the end of this fruit, right? It may happen well beyond my time. So I have to give up that attachment, right? 2, I can't, what's my success? I cannot dictate success as numbers of people going to camps or how many camps. All I can dictate my success as in my life is, did I say yes to the very best of my ability? And can I look God in the eye when I'm going to bed in that regard? And that's whatever the listener has in his life. Are you doing your absolute best for the salvation of souls, not only for yourself and the souls God put you directly responsible for, but for the community and church at large? Okay. And the third thing is I have to realize that the journey is part of the victory, because when I go take a left or I go downhill or whatever, people are just jumping on and joining in the walk. And so this summer, we're running, about 1,400 kids over 5 camps with, 500 volunteers. These volunteers are coming for a week of their life, unpaid, right? I mean, part of the, trying to get camp off the ground was, who the heck would do that? I mean, we can't get people to show up at a spaghetti dinner for an hour on a Friday night. Who's going to give up a week of time, And so I've just had the ability to watch saints. And one summer, a few summers ago, was I'm walking out with one of my directors, who's a president. He's a camper, and he became a priest ultimately, right? And I'm walking to the car. We're staggering. It's exhausting, right? And I said, Matt, I said, thanks for helping out all summer. And he goes, Ryan, not for nothing. I'm not doing this for you, right? And so, it's that stubbornness to do what you believe to be right. And that's the patron saint I want to be.
I think if you wanted to sugarcoat that, Ryan, you could say the patron saint of persistence, to have a nice little flair to it. But I like stubbornness better.
Stubbornness is more like crass. I'm much more, blunt like that.
Well, you're from New York, so
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
So for those who don't know, how did you come up with the name Camp Veritas?
We threw around a couple. I don't know. It was a couple of names. I think I saw Boondock Saints or something like that.
Yep. There you go.
There's a lot of Latin involved,
Yeah, see, of course.
No, I mean, but that was the point. It's like, what is the point of camp? And Camp Truth was really what I was thinking. And then Camp Veritas has a cooler ring to it,
It does. Absolutely. So, you throw Latin around, it makes people want to join. So it's all in the Latin.
It's true. It has this mystique, Yeah.
Well, the power of the Latin language. Absolutely.
Now, and again, if you're viewers, man, we can use all the help we can get at that front line. CampVeritas.com, is what we need you guys to sign up to look at it. If you want to be a man and, A, learn more, B, give back, it's time. If you're, as I said, if you're sitting there and you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong, right? Get uncomfortable, take the time. It is painful, but that's where our life's about, is get in there, get dirty. And there's going to campveritas.com. It's every week this summer, basically at a different site, from here.
Amazing. And are you guys going to Ireland? Did I see there's
Next
a camp?
week.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So when did you guys start going international?
I don't know how much time I have. Do I have any more time?
We're gonna have to bring you on for a third time for the full background for Camp Veritas.
It's cool, actually. The Camp Veritas Ireland story is like a 8-minuter.
Do it. Let's do it.
So, we're going to visit. Now, I'm going out there with my parents to visit, right? As a tourist. I'd been there in college for a few times. I brought my wife out on a date another time. And another time I go as a tourist. And the camps are happening in the States. And as I'm in Ireland, I'm walking through, and Ireland's like a canary in a cave in regards to like Europe, And it's like, Europe is already kind of dead in the new evangelization. Ireland was kind of this Catholic bastion that was kind of hanging in there for a long time, decades after Europe fell, right? And I look at Ireland as just the precursor of what's happening across the pond here in the United States. It's the same playbook Satan uses basically every time, right? And so we're out there, and of course, they'd already had this kind of great rebellion against God and the church, because the Irish spirit is very strong. Okay. And it's funny when you deal with Irish culture. I'm married to an Irish woman, half my kids are Irish. And when you're going to Ireland, you get the culture. It's a whole island full of my wife, But what I'd say is the term is crusty. And what I mean by that, is that they have this hard kind of exterior, right? And this gooey little inside, but you have to kind of deal with the hardness, right? And so, I'm out there and as a tourist, and I'm seeing, the church, and the church is like dying. I mean, there's no one there other than the old lady saying that Irish rosary at like warp speed, which I've adapted, actually. It's the way I pray it now. But you could see the passion in the Irish, not only in those in rebellion, like they're so on fire against God right now that it's not gonna be that hard to flip them back, because God doesn't like the lukewarm. Those are much harder people. I like a good rebellion, because once you get back to them and you start poking them and you realize how unhappy they are, they're much more ready to listen. They've already gone further into hell. And so when you're sitting here with like, what, let's let's rethink this, they come back and they're the biggest fish you'll get, right? And so I'm out in this golf course in Adare. It's one of the world's best golf courses, and it was a 12th century Franciscan monastery. And I'm walking amongst the ruins, praying the rosary at sunset. And I'm standing in this ruin, and the walls, which are rock, are growing like wildflowers, like crazy. It looked like a chia pet of flowers growing from the stone itself. Okay. And I look at God and I'm looking at this, and then very strongly in my heart, I went and I said, Lord, this country is in ruins, but there is life here, even life from the rock. You want me to do this here? And I felt very strong an instinct as a yes. And so very quietly, I started to look around Ireland. And why I brought up the crusty business is because when we went out there to even try to like find a site and stuff, I mean, I went to one of our counselors' mother's house out in Ireland, and she knows what time we're going to get there. And she lives in the middle of the country on a 1.5 lane road in the middle of nowhere. And at her house, there's a gate in front of her driveway. Like there's never been a human who accidentally found her house. And you have to get out of your car, which is parked in the middle of the road, and walk out and open the gate. Okay. And then pull your car in and then close the gate. Again, one would think to themselves, why do I need this thing? Then you get to the door and you knock on the door, right? And a little window opens. She goes, Ryan Young. She goes, who are you? What do you want? And I said, I'm Ryan Young. We're here. You have suitcases. This is the appointed hour. Oh, Ryan Young, wait 1 minute there. And she comes on down and opens the door. Oh, let me tell you about everything in my whole life. Okay. And she's telling me stuff you wouldn't tell a priest in confession about her kids. I know every one of the sins of her kids. Okay. And she talked for 3 straight days. Now, I had to go through a gate. I had to get through a door. And then once you're in the family. Okay.
Oh, man.
And so when I got home, I start calling people to try to get a site. But I'm like the Nigerian who emails you saying, if you give me your social security number, you have $1 million waiting in Nigeria. I just need your social security number. And when I'm calling the Irish, they're that skeptical about this American guy calling out of nowhere, cold calling, which I hate to do, trying to find a site to do this camp that they can't even imagine would happen, right? So as I'm getting the doors closed, okay, I'm in an American camp, and I go to the Lord. I said, look, Lord, I think we're supposed to be in Ireland. I'm not saying no, but these camps are growing so fast. What if I put Ireland on the back burner, right? And I said, and I just left at that. 3 hours later, I'm doing, we're at Mass at Veritas, and my Nigerian priest is up there. Not Nigerian, he's Nicaraguan, okay? Enrique Salvador, right? And so Enrique Salvo, he's from the Archdiocese of New York. And he's up there and he's giving his homily, and all of a sudden his sentences don't make sense from one to another. I mean, he's completely incoherent. And I'm listening to this. Now, there's priests that are incoherent, but this was even beyond that. I'm like, he's going to pass out or something.
Yeah.
So I got nursing to go up. He's like, I'm not feeling well, So I pull him off the altar in the middle of Mass and put on a backup priest, right, who finishes the Mass. I'm out there. I'm thinking he's going to pass out. His legs are up. We're stripping him down. He's like, I'm so embarrassed. In Nicaragua, it's 120 degrees, and I'm not having this problem, I got to a point after like an hour. I'm like, well, I got to make sure nothing else going on. He's only 35 or whatever. I'm like, go to the hospital. Well, I see him the next morning. And he goes, Ryan, I had the most vivid dream. He goes, I was in Ireland. He goes, Ireland was busting forth with flowers. He goes, God was picking these flowers into bundles. He goes, I have no idea what it means. I've never even been to Ireland in my life. So I was like, all right, I guess we're going back to Ireland. Thanks, boss, right? So then,
oh my gosh.
We opened in Ireland. And then like last year, I mean, I felt like I was working with the Russian government, okay, of Ireland. It was the most bureaucratic, painful, COVID fearing, crazy, you have no idea how hard it was to open last summer. And against all odds, I mean, there was so much against this thing. And I'm like, we are having it until they arrest us, okay? And what's cool is that the staff's like, yeah, we're doing it, And we just did it. I said, we are not taking no for an answer. We are going forward and using everything we can to have it happen. This is for souls. And the whole team is ready to die for it, okay? And so we go in there and we do it. And the camp was very successful. This year, it is booming. I mean, I could tell you the stubbornness we had last year has translated into pure abundance of fruit, eternal fruit. We doubled the size of the camp this year. They took it over. Now they have courage, right? So we got out there and I'm like, we're leading it. We're going in head first. I'm leading the charge, right? And they're like, all right, now they're like pumped up. They know they could do it. So the Irish themselves ran, are putting together this camp, and I'm showing up as like a guy to shake hands halfway through the
Yeah.
week because
Yeah.
they got it now, right? There is fire that has started in Ireland, and I'm going to go watch the miracle, baby. So,
Oh, that's amazing. I've never even been to Ireland, and suddenly I have a dream, and all these flowers are blooming. Do you know what this is about, right? That's incredible.
He knew nothing about it.
Oh my
Nothing about it.
gosh.
And again, this was within an hour or two of that prayer. No one knew I was even looking at Ireland. I wasn't
Yeah.
going to tell people that to get
Yeah.
everyone excited because I
Yeah.
couldn't get through the door. And now, by the way, since I've been to Ireland, right? Like these camps, these Irish are hard, man, because we work with the CFR friars out there, the Franciscan friars of the renewal, the gray robe guys, right, that are all over, and they have a couple of houses out there, and so do their sisters, right? And I'm talking about going out there, and they're working in the hardest neighborhoods of Ireland. And in the first camp, I'm called by one of the brothers. He's like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Ryan, they're hard, man. I mean, they're really hard." I'm like, "You guys have like houses in the South Bronx and Newark, New Jersey, and like the jungles of like Nicaragua, and like Costa Rica. Like, how hard could it be?" He goes, "They're intelligently evil, man." He goes, "They'll take your very soul. They're going to push every button and they'll find it and they're going to go for it." And he goes, "It's a different league." And I was like, "I want it." Right. And it was funny because you're out there, and my hardest kids, when I've been back in later years, are back. They're the biggest fish. They're the enforcers. Okay. It's like the movie Gladiator. Okay. Like when he's walking the line in the beginning of the movie.
Oh yeah.
And there's a deep respect because he's out there in the blood and guts with everybody. And it's like, once you're in that Irish family, they are ready to die for you, or in a radical way. I mean, they're ready to go, and those big fish translate into big apostles, right? And when you don't give up on them, God throws you out there in a little dinghy in a storm, and he says, "Go get them," and you're pulling back fish that are sinking your boat, right? And it's one of these things where it's like, you're going to be stubborn with that fish. I'm not letting them go. There's no accidents. This kid's mine, right? It's like, I had a kid out there, and Irish, he's in total rebellion. He wouldn't go to mass. And he's like, I go, "What's your deal?" And he goes, "I don't believe in God." And I said, "That doesn't mean God doesn't exist. That just means you've left reality, right?" And his jaw dropped. Like he thought I was going to sit there, and try to convince him. No, I'm sorry. You can't make God go away.
Right.
You've now left reality. You're in fantasy world. He was back.
Yeah.
So, like go.
No, you made a statement too that the ones that are in full out rebellion, those are the ones that once you get them, then they are hooked forever. And totally. I feel like in the US it's more of the lukewarm people. And I mean, just look at our society here in America, and it's totally a false sense of reality. We are all living in fantasy world. Yes. And you made a point too about, what were you talking about? Like alpha male, alpha female. And it's like, well, what is a male? What is a female nowadays? And that's apparently a confusing question to ask. And it's like, we are that's a
symptom. That's a symptom, right? Yes. Of the religion of self. So the book is called Veritas Mountain, right? And the whole point is it talks about the religion of self, and it talks about this, idea that you're making reality and everyone else has to work around it, and it's, again, very overused words. By the way, if you don't join the hysteria and the fantasy, right, then all of a sudden you're a hater, you're a bigot, you're an ist, you're an obe, and they're just going to box you in and bully the hell out of you, make sure you lose your job and kill you on the internet. And bottom line is at some point you do have to speak. Everyone's bonkers at this point. They've completely left reality because they think it revolves around their personal ego. And it is a celebration of basically ego, each individual ego. So, yeah.
So campveritas.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Where can people find your book?
You know what? Let me know. I've never sold a copy. I mean, you'd find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or anything like that. It's out there, right? So Veritas Mountain, it's the 3rd edition, right? I keep adding to it because God keeps teaching. And then I'm like, oh, I have to write another one. And the irony with the book is like, it's written in total chaos, right? I'm not kidding about my house with all these kids. And so it's not like I can finish a complete thought. The fact that it's in a book, like at all, okay, is a miracle because it was written in just a few hours and totally distracted. And then what's funny is I have no memory. So like I'll pick up the book a year later and read it myself, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good.
This is great.
I'm like,
who wrote this book?
I'm like, damn, all right, like because I have no memory of what I was even writing because there was so much chaos.
Oh, that's
that
amazing.
Was like, so it's a funny thing. And the other thing is I had a number of publishers who wanted to publish it. The problem is they don't speak like me. So they would be like, yes, you're not the saint of stubbornness, you're the saint of perseverance. That's not the way I speak.
Yeah.
And so it's like so I'm like, I want it to be rawer than that. I want it to be like just a normal guy talking to a normal person.
Right.
And the cool thing about a book is that, I've handed 1,000 of these out at work to the most secular liberal people in the world, right? Like, and the reality is out of all those thousands of books, I've never had one actually call my boss and complain, right? Because I don't give it to them until they're ready. And sometimes most of the time is never. And then I'll give it to them when they know I love them. And we have that authentic relationship, even if it's going to be a hard thing for them. Now, you could argue that they just never read it. so they don't even know what's in it to complain, But
let's assume the best in people, that the writing was so terrific that it changed and transformed their lives. So let's just go with that.
Well, yes, of course. So, bottom line, though, is that they know you love them. Right. And I've also said this, you'd be surprised, those people, those fish, those ones you would just think that, you robustly love them when again, there's no accident and that they're just the son or daughter of God. And then, like when you're being crucified, those are the guys that are going to be there,
Absolutely.
And it's like, so there's a genuine authenticity to it, even in a debate. Right. I'm very embraced by our, gay community here. Right. Because I talk about there's authentic homosexuality and then there's homosexuality that goes screaming for attention. Right. The authentic ones know I love them. And so they're basically sitting there saying, okay, and they're going to be at my crucifixion at some point. Right. Because they know we don't agree on everything. We don't need to. They know I love them. And again, that's the big lie. Which is if you don't jump with me in every little thought I have or every little fantasy or every little whatever, I don't, you don't love me. That's not the case. And so the people who understand that when I give them the book and that kind of stuff, they're cool with it.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And again, we'll leave a link in the show notes. And Camp Veritas, the Climbing Veritas Mountain. Is that the name of it? If it's green, it's the second version. If it's Veritas Mountain, it's blue. That's the third edition. Even changed the title. All right.
A little bit. There's nuances. And notice it's in like Latin print, so it looks like Latin.
See the power of the Latin language.
Anything with Latins is better.
Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, Ryan, this has been a blast. I'm sure we will have to have you on again. Is there anything else you want to add? Anywhere else to find you?
No, look, I'm just happy. I'm happy to have had this conversation with you. And keep up the good work. This show is needed. And this is a show that, again, you will have no idea who's listening, but God does. So, be stubborn and keep going.
I will be stubborn, and I'll keep it as stubborn. I will not change it to persistent. We'll just keep it stubborn.
Fair enough. Thanks, James.
All right, man. Well, Ryan, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. Men, go out there and be stubborn. And also be a saint. Be a saint.
Indeed.